Hercule Poirot is summoned to a serene lakeside retreat, where beauty hides a chilling mystery. When a guest vanishes without a trace by the crystal waters, Poirot must read the ripples and reflections to uncover the truth lurking beneath. Chapter 1. The Hook. The inciting incident was a tranquil summer evening at the Grand Lakeview Manor, nestled beside the serene Crystal Lake, where the rippling waters mirrored the blue sky above. Guests had gathered to celebrate the annual gala, a luxurious affair hosted by the illustrious Darnley family, whose wealth and influence extended far beyond the lakeside. Lady Evelyn Darnley, the matriarch, was renowned for her impeccable taste and gracious hosting. The manor, with its sprawling gardens and elegant stone hallways, was brimming with laughter and chatter. The crystal chandeliers shimmered in the soft glow of candlelight, casting intricate patterns on the polished marble floors. As guests mingled, the air was thick with the scent of roses, and the sound of a string quartet floated in the background. Among the gathering, one individual stood out, a striking young woman by the name of Clara Wren. She was an heiress from an old, fading line, recently returned from Paris, her return as mysterious as her departure years ago. Clara had long been the subject of speculation, particularly since the passing of her late father, whose fortune was believed to be shrouded in secrecy. As the evening wore on, Clara became the center of attention. She was the very picture of elegance, her gown a cascade of silver silk that shimmered like moonlight. Her laughter filled the room, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. Yet, beneath the surface of this polished exterior, there was an undeniable tension, a secret that perhaps even Clara was not fully aware of. The first signs of trouble came at the stroke of midnight. A shrill scream echoed through the manor, shattering the festive atmosphere. Guests froze, their conversation dying in an instant, their eyes wide with fear. From the direction of the grand staircase, a servant rushed into the ballroom. Her face pale as a ghost. "Lady Clara," she gasped, barely able to catch her breath. She has vanished." A wave of disbelief swept through the room. Clara, the star of the evening, was gone, disappeared without a trace. The search for her began immediately. The family and their guests scoured the estate, but no trace of Clara Wren was found. The crystal-clear waters of the lake remained still, the garden paths undisturbed by footprints. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Yet, a few hours later, a cryptic note was discovered in Clara's personal study. It was written in elegant, precise handwriting, bearing only a few short words: "The truth lies beneath." The words sent a chill through those who read them, hinting at something far darker than a mere disappearance. Lady Evelyn Darnley was beside herself. Her composure cracked, though she was careful to maintain a semblance of grace. The police were called in, and while they combed the estate, there was an unspoken understanding that they were ill-prepared for a mystery of this nature. It was at that moment that Hercule Poirot arrived. The famous Belgian detective had been staying nearby, on the invitation of a distant acquaintance. He had heard of the disappearance, and as always, his curiosity had been piqued. The details of the case were enough to make him interested, but it was the note, the cryptic message, that told Poirot this was no ordinary case. He arrived quietly at the scene, his presence calm yet commanding. His sharp eyes quickly took in the room, observing not only the people but the atmosphere itself. Poirot's entrance was subtle, unnoticed by many, but his gaze was already hard at work, examining the smallest of details. His mind raced through a series of questions, his little gray cells already beginning to connect the dots. "What we have here, my friends," Poirot said, his voice carrying a quiet authority, "is not a simple disappearance. No, there is more at play here, much more." With those words, the mystery of Clara Wren's vanishing had only just begun. Poirot's mind was already working, though it was far too early to reveal his thoughts. The search for answers would begin, but in this case the truth would not come easily. The detective could sense that this was not merely a matter of finding a missing person. The truth, as the note hinted, lay beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered, layer by layer. And Poirot was ready to dive into the depths. As the guests gathered nervously in the drawing room, unsure of what was happening or what to expect, Poirot's first impressions began to take shape. He surveyed the room carefully, noting the interactions, the subtle tensions between individuals, the way some avoided eye contact while others appeared far too calm. For a situation of this magnitude, the true nature of the crime was not yet clear, but the detective was certain of one thing: everyone here had something to hide. This was a case that would require all of Poirot's insight, all of his skill in reading human behavior and detecting the smallest inconsistencies. It was not a case for brute force or simple logic. This was a puzzle of the mind, a mystery of psychology, and Hercule Poirot was the only one capable of solving it. Thus began the investigation at Crystal Lake. Chapter 2. The first guests of Lakeview Manor, still shaken by Clara Wren's disappearance, were gathered in the drawing room, nervously exchanging glances. Lady Evelyn sat in a high-backed chair, her hands wringing a lace handkerchief. The tension in the air was thick, palpable, but it was Hercule Poirot who remained composed, quietly observing. He had instructed the family and staff to remain in the room as he began his investigation. His mind already whirring with questions, Poirot stood before the guests, his sharp eyes scanning the faces around him, not missing the nervous tics or furtive glances exchanged between them. He had yet to speak a word about the disappearance, but his presence alone made it clear that this was no ordinary matter. He turned to Lady Evelyn, who seemed to have regained some of her composure, though her face was still pale. "Madam, perhaps I could be shown to the place where Miss Wren was last seen?" he asked, his voice as calm and measured as ever. Lady Evelyn nodded, her lips tight. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Please, follow me." The pair made their way through the grand halls, the sound of Poirot's footsteps muted against the plush carpet. As they reached the staircase that led up to Clara's rooms, Poirot could already sense the heaviness in the air, the lingering unease that seemed to haunt every corner of the manor. They arrived at Clara's study, a spacious room adorned with bookshelves lined with leather-bound tomes and rich velvet curtains. There were faint traces of Clara's presence. The delicate scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, and a half-empty glass of wine sat on a side table, untouched since she had vanished. Poirot's eyes immediately fell upon the note that had been discovered earlier, resting on the desk. He reached for it, his fingers delicately tracing the elegant handwriting. "The truth lies beneath," he murmured, repeating the words aloud. A curious message indeed. What could it mean, I wonder? Lady Evelyn, her voice trembling, responded, "I don't understand. Why would Clara leave such a cryptic note? She was not one for mysteries. She never." Poirot held up a hand to silence her. "Madam, please, allow me to examine the details." He moved to the desk, carefully inspecting every item in the room. A small journal lay open on the table, its pages filled with Clara's neat handwriting, but nothing of particular interest stood out. Poirot's gaze flicked to the window, where the night sky cast a shadow over the still lake beyond. Then his eyes narrowed as he spotted something that seemed out of place. The floor beneath the desk was slightly scuffed, as though someone had dragged something across it. Poirot knelt down, examining the marks more closely. A glimmer of recognition crossed his face, though he said nothing. He stood, moving back to the desk with an air of quiet confidence. "Madam, did Miss Wren frequently keep this room in such disarray?" Poirot inquired, his tone measured. Lady Evelyn looked around the room, her brow furrowing in confusion. "No, never. Clara was meticulous. She kept everything in order. This is unlike her." Poirot nodded, his mind working through the possibilities. He stood still for a moment, deep in thought. Then, with a swift motion, he turned toward the door, his sharp gaze fixing on the staff members who had been waiting outside. "I must speak to the servants," he announced, "and we must also take a closer look at the rest of the manor. There may be more to this mystery than meets the eye." Lady Evelyn looked uncertain, but nodded reluctantly. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever you think is necessary." Poirot's next move was to interrogate the staff. The household was made up of several long-time employees, and it was likely that one of them had seen something of interest. The butler, Mr. Finch, was the first to be questioned. Finch was a tall, gaunt man, his face drawn in deep lines of exhaustion. He had been serving the Darnley family for many years, and his loyalty was unquestioned. Yet there was something in his eyes, a flicker of fear that Poirot could not ignore. "Monsieur Finch, I understand this is a difficult time, but I must ask, did you see anything unusual this evening?" Poirot's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, probing. Mr. Finch hesitated for a moment before replying. "No, Monsieur Poirot. Everything was as it should be. I served drinks to the guests, and then the commotion began. The lady, Miss Wren, was gone. There was nothing strange about it before that." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Nothing unusual? Not even a sound or a movement in the hallways?" "No, nothing," Finch insisted, his eyes darting nervously. "I swear it, sir." Poirot studied him for a moment, the tension in the air thickening. "Very well. I shall speak to the others." The servants' quarters were located down a narrow hallway, and as Poirot entered the space, he immediately felt the heaviness of the atmosphere. The maids and footmen were huddled together, whispering in hushed voices, their faces filled with apprehension. Poirot noticed the way they looked at him as if they feared being implicated in something far worse than a mere disappearance. Poirot took a moment to observe them before addressing the group. "Tell me, has anyone here seen Miss Wren before she vanished? Perhaps in the garden or by the lake?" The youngest maid, a nervous-looking girl named Daisy, spoke up hesitantly. I saw her, Monsieur Poirot. She was walking near the garden gate earlier this evening, just before dinner. But she was alone, and she seemed in quite a hurry." Poirot's interest piqued. "Alone, you say? Did she mention anything to you? Anything unusual?" Daisy shook her head. "No, monsieur. She didn't speak to me. She just walked quickly, her head down." Poirot stood silently for a moment, his mind piecing together the fragments of information. The mention of the garden gate was significant, but it was not enough to draw any conclusions. There was something here, something hidden beneath the surface, but Poirot knew that uncovering the truth would require more than just simple observation. As he prepared to leave the servants' quarters, Poirot's thoughts turned to the peculiar note. What did it mean, and why had Clara left it behind? The truth, he was certain, lay somewhere within the walls of Lakeview Manor, but it would take a careful examination of every clue and every person involved to reveal it. With a final glance at the gathered servants, Poirot turned and exited the room, his mind already moving forward. The game had only just begun. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. As the hours passed, the atmosphere at Lakeview Manor grew increasingly tense. The once festive evening had turned into a restless night, the guests now aware that something far more sinister had occurred. The search for Clara Wren continued, but no fresh clues had emerged. Hercule Poirot, however, had already begun his methodical work, piecing together the threads of the mystery. Though he said little about his findings, he had returned to the drawing room, where Lady Evelyn Darnley and several other members of the household had gathered. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their faces drawn with worry. Poirot entered, his sharp eyes scanning the room, noticing the faint tremors in some guests' hands, the sudden coughing fits of others, and the way a few avoided his gaze altogether. Poirot's gaze lingered on them for a moment before he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. It is time we meet our suspects, yes? Lady Evelyn nodded, her face still pale, but she gave a small, reluctant smile. I agree. They are all here now, Monsieur Poirot. The staff has been questioned. What should we do next? Poirot took a seat across from her, the fingers of his left hand tapping lightly on his knee. Madam, there are always subtle signals. In the way one speaks, in the way one avoids questions. You will see, watch closely. Each one of your guests has a story to tell, even if they choose to remain silent about it. Evelyn's expression hardened slightly. You suspect one of them? Of course, Poirot replied, his tone quiet but firm. I suspect them all. This is not a matter of random misfortune. Clara's disappearance is not an accident. We are dealing with something far more deliberate, a planned action. And one would assume one of you knows the truth. The room seemed to grow colder at Poirot's words, a ripple of discomfort sweeping over the gathered guests. None of them spoke, but the subtle shift in body language told Poirot everything he needed to know. There was a tightness to the way Lady Evelyn clasped her hands, the way Lord Albert Darnley, her husband, avoided looking anyone in the eye. Even the younger guests, the cousins and distant relatives, looked around uneasily. Though their faces showed a veneer of polite concern, Poirot's gaze settled on them, his mind whirring as he assessed each of them in turn. He had already noted their mannerisms, their nervous habits, the slight unease that lingered like a shadow over the group. They all had something to hide, he was certain of it. I propose we begin with you, Lady Evelyn, Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm. You are, of course, the matriarch of this household. You are the one who welcomed Miss Wren into your home. You must have known her better than anyone. Lady Evelyn stiffened, but did not flinch. I knew Clara only as one knows an acquaintance, Monsieur Poirot. I did not know her secrets, and yet, Poirot continued, you have been protective of her since her return. You were very careful when you spoke of her earlier. Why? Lady Evelyn blinked, then set her jaw. I simply wish to keep my guests from speculation. This is a private matter, Monsieur Poirot. I am sure you understand. Poirot nodded slowly. Of course. But one cannot hide the truth by avoiding it, madam. Sooner or later, all truths must be revealed. He then turned his attention to the Darnley's son, Charles. Charles Darnley was a young man in his early 30s, his dark hair slightly disheveled and his clothes appearing less pristine than they had during the gala. His eyes were bloodshot, and he seemed particularly restless, shifting in his seat every few moments as if he wished to be anywhere but here. Monsieur Darnley, Poirot said, addressing him directly. You were seen conversing with Miss Wren earlier in the evening. What was the nature of your conversation? Charles shifted uncomfortably. We spoke, just briefly, nothing of importance. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his gaze piercing. Nothing of importance. A curious statement from someone who, I am told, spent a considerable amount of time with Miss Wren in the past. Surely there was something more than nothing. Charles hesitated, then muttered. We spoke about her plans, her future. She had just returned from Paris, you know. She was unsettled, but she didn't confide in me. There was nothing significant. Poirot's lips curled into a slight smile. Ah, but there is always something, monsieur. Even the smallest details often reveal much. He shifted his attention to another guest, the older woman seated beside Charles, Lady Clarissa, Clara's aunt. Lady Clarissa was a formidable figure, her sharp features set in a permanent frown. She had long been the head of Clara's father's estate before his passing, and it was widely known that the two women had never been particularly close. Yet, tonight, Lady Clarissa's eyes glinted with an almost predatory sharpness, betraying her otherwise controlled exterior. Lady Clarissa, Poirot began, his voice smooth as silk. You've been somewhat quiet this evening. I trust you've not been too distressed by the events. Lady Clarissa's gaze didn't waver from Poirot's as she responded, her voice cool and measured. "I have seen many things in my life, Monsieur Poirot. A young woman's disappearance is not the worst of them." "Indeed," Poirot replied. "But surely you must agree that this particular disappearance is unusual, and with so many people involved, it becomes difficult to imagine that anyone is completely innocent." Lady Clarissa's lips pressed into a thin line, and Poirot noticed the slightest tremor in her hand as she reached for her glass of wine. Her reaction, though subtle, did not escape him. "Ah," Poirot continued, "but perhaps you are right. The truth lies hidden beneath layers. Layers of people, of motives, of carefully crafted masks. But I will find the truth, madam. I will find it." As Poirot spoke, he turned to the final member of the group, the young woman who had remained mostly silent since the investigation began, Clara's cousin Eleanor. Eleanor Wren was a slight figure, her face pale and drawn, her eyes darting nervously from one person to another. Unlike the others, she hadn't yet spoken up, though her unease was palpable. "Mademoiselle Wren," Poirot said, his tone softer, more probing. "I wonder, do you have anything to share with us? You were close to Miss Wren, were you not?" Eleanor looked up at Poirot, her eyes wide, and for a moment it seemed as though she would speak. But then her voice faltered. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. I don't know anything, Monsieur Poirot," she whispered. Poirot's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, noting the quick breath she took and the slight trembling in her hands. There was something there, something hidden beneath her nervous demeanor. But Poirot knew better than to push too quickly. With a calm nod, Poirot addressed the group once more. "I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we have many more questions to answer. But the game is afoot, as they say, and soon all will be revealed." As the room fell into an uneasy silence, Poirot's mind raced through the layers of deception, already sensing that the truth was much more tangled than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 4. Poirot arrived following morning dawned cold and gray, the heavy mist from Crystal Lake creeping up to the estate like a slow-moving tide. Hercule Poirot, having spent the night mulling over the details of the case, awoke with a singular resolve. This mystery would be solved, and it would be done so with precision. His keen mind had already begun to piece together the small details, the subtle hints that no one else had noticed, but he was careful not to rush. In his experience, haste often led to error, and he could afford no mistakes. The guests remained in their rooms or in the drawing room, awaiting the next steps. Poirot had insisted on speaking to them again, as he felt that some of the threads from last night's interviews had been too easily dismissed. The manor had grown still and tense in the wake of Clara Wren's disappearance, and Poirot sensed that the walls themselves were holding secrets. When Poirot entered the drawing room, Lady Evelyn Darnley was seated by the window, her hands folded in her lap. Her usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the weariness of someone who was deeply troubled. The night had been long, and her thoughts were scattered, as though she, too, was trying to piece together what had happened to her guest. Or perhaps something more. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, standing as he approached, "I trust you have come to some conclusions." Poirot smiled politely, though it did not reach his eyes. "Madam, I have only just begun to scratch the surface of this mystery. I have my suspicions, but they are yet to be confirmed." He sat across from her, his posture perfectly upright, his eyes sharp. "It is critical, you understand, that we proceed with caution. There is no room for error. Every word spoken, every glance exchanged, every hesitation, each of these holds a clue, as does the very manner of your guests." Lady Evelyn nodded, though there was a subtle tightness around her mouth. "I trust you, Monsieur Poirot, but I must say, I do not see how any of this could be linked to Clara's disappearance." Poirot's gaze softened slightly. "Ah, but you see, madam, that is the very essence of it. You do not see because you are too close to the situation. I, on the other hand, am an outsider. I observe, I listen, and I notice things that others do not." Lady Evelyn looked at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and reluctant hope. "So, you believe someone here is involved?" "One of my guests." Poirot nodded slowly. "I believe so, madam. But the question is not so simple as to identify who. No, it is more than that. The question is, why?" Lady Evelyn sighed deeply, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of the world was on them. "I do not know what to make of this, Monsieur Poirot. Clara was, well, she was an enigma. She returned after so many years, but she hardly spoke of her time away. She kept things to herself. Perhaps I never really knew her." Poirot's sharp eyes never left her face, and he leaned forward ever so slightly. "What did you see, madam, when you looked at her? You say she kept things to herself. Did she ever give you cause to believe there was something more? Something that caused her to return to Lakeview Manor at this time?" Lady Evelyn shifted in her seat, as though wrestling with a memory. There was something in her eyes when she first arrived. She had changed, monsieur. I think she came back with a purpose, but she never said what it was. I thought perhaps she simply needed time to adjust to life here again. But now, I wonder if there was something more she was hiding." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Though he remained silent for a moment, he was about to speak when the door to the drawing room opened and Charles Darnley entered, his presence immediately changing the tone of the room. His dark eyes locked onto Poirot, a faint trace of annoyance flashing across his features before he masked it behind a veneer of politeness. "Poirot," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of something else. "What have you discovered? Any leads, perhaps?" Poirot studied him for a long moment before responding, his voice calm but with a certain firmness. "Monsieur Darnley, I believe you know as well as I that this case is far from simple. We are dealing with something more intricate than a mere disappearance." Charles scoffed lightly, crossing his arms over his chest. "I don't see how you can say that, Poirot. We all know Clara's habits. She was prone to fits of temper, sometimes. Perhaps she simply wanted to leave. She's done it before." Poirot's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "That may be, monsieur. But if it were merely a case of running away, why the note? And why the scuffed floor of the study? A person does not leave in such a manner without leaving some trace, some clue. I suspect that Miss Wren was not alone in her actions, Monsieur Darnley." Charles' jaw tightened, but he did not respond immediately. His gaze flicked toward Lady Evelyn, but he quickly looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Poirot noticed the subtle tension between them. Something more than familial concern seemed to be at play. "Perhaps you are right, Poirot," Charles finally said, though his voice lacked conviction. "But if there is a deeper mystery, then it lies with her, not with any of us." Poirot smiled faintly, though the gesture did not quite reach his eyes. "Ah, but it always lies with us, monsieur. The clues are never just left for us to find by chance. No, we must dig deeper. We must look beneath the surface." Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but before he could respond, the door opened once again. Lady Clarissa entered, her sharp eyes taking in the scene before her with an air of quiet disdain. She glanced briefly at Poirot, then turned her attention to Lady Evelyn. "I assume we are ready to proceed." Lady Clarissa's voice was crisp, her tone carrying an air of authority. "This foolishness has gone on long enough. We must find out what happened to Clara." Poirot studied her for a moment, noting the way she carried herself. There was something in her demeanor, something almost practiced, like she was used to being in control. She held herself with the confidence of one who believed herself to be untouchable. "Ah, Madame Clarissa," Poirot said, his voice smooth. "You are correct. The time for delay is over. But we must proceed carefully. There's more to this than meets the eye." As the group gathered their thoughts and prepared to continue the investigation, Poirot's mind was already racing. There were patterns here, hidden beneath the surface, but he needed more. He needed to watch them all closely, to listen to their words and, most importantly, to their silences. The truth was out there, and Hercule Poirot was determined to find it no matter how deeply it was buried. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. By the time evening descended upon Lakeview Manor once more, the air was thick with unspoken questions. The guests and family members had retreated to their rooms, casting furtive glances toward each other as they moved about the grand estate. The lingering discomfort of Clara Wren's disappearance had taken root in everyone's heart, and the ever-present tension simmered beneath polite conversation and careful gestures. Hercule Poirot had insisted on conducting the interviews one by one. He had told Lady Evelyn that the key to unraveling this mystery lay in observing the smallest of details, small inconsistencies in the way one spoke, the way one carried oneself. Everyone in the house had a role to play in the drama, whether they knew it or not, and Poirot, with his little gray cells, would find the truth hidden within. The first to be questioned was Charles Darnley. Poirot had noted the young man's nervous energy earlier, his fidgeting, his restless manner. Charles was seated now in the study, his legs crossed in a stiff, almost defensive posture. His eyes flickered toward Poirot as the detective entered, but the momentary unease was quickly masked by a forced smile. "Sit, Monsieur Darnley," Poirot said, his voice polite but firm. "We must have a few words." Charles nodded, his jaw tightening. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I'm at your disposal." Poirot took a seat across from him, his sharp eyes never leaving Charles as he began his questions. "You spent time with Miss Wren earlier in the evening. You mentioned last night that she was unsettled. Could you elaborate on that? What exactly did she say to you?" Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I didn't mean to suggest anything significant. It was just a brief conversation, nothing of importance. She seemed distracted, yes, but I assumed it was just the excitement of returning home. Nothing unusual." Poirot's gaze narrowed slightly. "And yet you spent time with her alone, in a room just down the hall from where the others were gathered. What was she doing at that time? Was she pacing? Was she nervous?" Charles hesitated, and Poirot watched him closely. "She wasn't pacing," he said, finally. "But yes, she was distracted. She was thinking about something. But I didn't press her. She was always private. You know how it is with someone like her, someone who's been away for so long." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming softer but more insistent. "And did she say anything else, anything out of the ordinary? Perhaps something that might give us a clue as to her state of mind?" Charles shifted again, his gaze darting to the window, the curtains fluttering faintly in the breeze. For a brief moment, Poirot noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he clenched his hands together. It was subtle, but it did not escape the detective's attention. She seemed to be waiting for something," Charles said, his voice quieter now. "But I don't know what. She didn't mention anything specific." Poirot nodded, absorbing this new information. He made a note in his mind, though he did not speak immediately. Instead, he simply observed Charles, waiting for the young man to offer anything more. After a long pause, Poirot stood. "Thank you, Monsieur Darnley. You have been most helpful. I may have more questions for you later." Charles seemed to breathe a little easier, but he did not rise immediately. He simply nodded stiffly, his eyes still fixed on Poirot as the detective moved toward the door. As Poirot exited the study, he made his way down the hall toward the drawing room, where Lady Clarissa had requested to speak with him. She had been an enigma during the last conversation, her sharp, calculating gaze never once leaving Poirot, as though she were trying to read him in the same way he was reading her. It was clear that she was not one to reveal anything without a careful calculation. Poirot found her seated near the fireplace, her posture rigid, her eyes cold but calculating. She looked up as he entered, her lips curling into a faint, practiced smile. There was no warmth in her expression, but Poirot had long since learned that warmth was often a mask for something more dangerous. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth and measured, "I suppose you have questions for me as well?" Poirot took a seat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Indeed, madam. You were very quiet during our initial meeting. I wonder if there is something you wish to share. Perhaps something about Miss Wren?" Lady Clarissa's expression did not change, but Poirot could sense the shift in her demeanor. "I hardly see how anything about Clara could be of interest to you, Monsieur Poirot. She was a grown woman, capable of making her own choices. I did not play a part in her life." Poirot nodded slowly, his gaze sharp. "And yet you were the one to take charge of the family estate after her father's death. Were you not? You had a hand in Clara's inheritance. Perhaps you know more about her. Finances?" Lady Clarissa's eyes flickered with a brief flash of something fear, anger, or perhaps just irritation. "My family's wealth is none of your concern, Monsieur Poirot. Clara's return had nothing to do with any such matters." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but insistent. "Ah, but madam, we must not ignore such things. A person's financial matters often reveal their motivations, their desires. Perhaps Clara came back to reclaim something that you were keeping from her." Lady Clarissa stiffened, but she did not break eye contact. "You are suggesting that I am hiding something? That I have something to gain from Clara's disappearance?" Poirot's gaze softened, though the sharpness in his voice remained. "I suggest nothing, madam, but I do ask that you tell me the truth. What were your dealings with Miss Wren before she disappeared?" Lady Clarissa paused, as though calculating her response. She opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. Poirot's gaze flicked toward it, noting the timing with a quiet sense of satisfaction. It was clear that Lady Clarissa had not expected such direct questioning. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Clarissa said, her tone colder now, "I am done here. If you must question me, I will speak when I am ready." Poirot stood, his movements deliberate. "As you wish, madam. But remember, the truth always comes to light, even when one seeks to hide it." With that, Poirot exited the room, his mind already racing. The interviews had begun, but they were far from complete. There were too many contradictions, too many subtle gestures that suggested deeper secrets, and he was determined to uncover them. Piece by piece. Chapter 6. First false lead following morning unfolded with an oppressive sense of anticipation. Hanging over Lakeview Manor, the mist from Crystal Lake had settled into the estate, shrouding it in an eerie stillness, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Hercule Poirot, having spent a restless night pondering the case, had already formed some conclusions, but knew there was much more to uncover. He was no stranger to the subtle games people played in the face of a crime, and he knew this one was no different. The guests and family members remained on edge, aware that the mystery of Clara Wren's disappearance was not as simple as it seemed. The manor buzzed with hushed whispers as Poirot proceeded with his plan. He would interview the suspects individually, one by one, until the truth began to surface. His keen eyes had already identified several inconsistencies in their behaviors, but it was still too early to draw any conclusions. His first appointment of the day was with Eleanor Wren, Clara's younger cousin. She had been the most reticent of the group the night before, her eyes darting nervously whenever Clara's name was mentioned. Poirot found her in the garden, standing by a hedge and staring out at the water. The gentle lapping of the lake's waves seemed to echo in the quiet of the early morning. Her posture was rigid, arms tightly folded over her chest. It was clear that she was lost in thought, but Poirot was not about to let her retreat into silence. Mademoiselle Wren, Poirot called softly, his voice cutting through the stillness of the morning. Might I speak with you for a moment? Eleanor stiffened at the sound of his voice, but turned to face him slowly. Her face was pale, and her wide eyes betrayed the anxiety she was trying to suppress. She forced a smile, but it was thin and unconvincing. Monsieur Poirot, she greeted him, though her voice lacked any real enthusiasm. Of course, I was just thinking. Poirot nodded, noting her discomfort. He had no intention of allowing her to hide behind pleasantries. Thinking. Ah, mademoiselle, we all must think, but some thoughts are better shared than others. Tell me, what have you been thinking about? Eleanor hesitated, her gaze shifting nervously to the water. I don't know, she muttered. It's just so strange. Clara was always unpredictable, but I never thought she would just disappear. I've been wondering if something happened to her, something she was afraid of. Poirot took a step closer, his voice calm but insistent. Afraid of something, mademoiselle? Do you know what it was that caused her fear? Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, and for a brief moment, Poirot saw a flicker of something behind her gaze. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, but she quickly masked it with a downward glance. No, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She never told me anything. Clara always kept things to herself. Poirot studied her carefully, noting the subtle crack in her composure. Eleanor was hiding something. He was sure of it. There was a deep unease in her manner, as though she was struggling with her own guilt. Poirot leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make it clear that this conversation was not one to be taken lightly. You say Miss Wren kept things to herself, Poirot observed. But surely there must have been something, some hint, some detail that would explain her behavior, her fear. People do not act without reason, mademoiselle. Eleanor's hands tightened into fists at her sides, and she shook her head. I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. I wish I could help, but I don't. Clara was unpredictable. She did things on her own terms. I never understood her fully. Poirot remained silent for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. He could sense that there was more beneath the surface, more than Eleanor was willing to admit. She was hiding something, but whether it was out of fear or some other reason, Poirot could not yet tell. He stepped back slightly, his gaze never leaving her face. Mademoiselle, Poirot said softly, the truth, as always, is buried deep. But if you know something, anything, you must share it with me. Clara is missing, and the only way to find her is by uncovering everything. Eleanor looked up at him, her expression shifting. For a moment, Poirot saw a flicker of guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She swallowed hard and shook her head again. I don't know anything, Monsieur Poirot, she insisted, her voice quiet. I wish I did. Poirot's sharp gaze lingered on her for another moment, then he nodded. Very well, mademoiselle. But remember, the truth cannot remain hidden forever. I will find it, with or without your help. He turned and began to walk away. But before he could take more than a few steps, Eleanor's voice stopped him. Monsieur Poirot, she called softly. There was one thing. A few weeks ago, Clara mentioned something about someone watching her, but I don't know who it was. She never explained. She just seemed scared. Poirot stopped, turning slowly to face her. Eleanor's words were like a crack in the case, a faint glimmer of light in the darkness. Someone was watching her. He repeated, his voice calm but intense. Eleanor nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Yes, she wouldn't say who, but it was like she was running from something, or someone. Poirot gave a slow nod, his mind already racing through the implications. This was the first real lead, the first tangible piece of information that might explain Clara's behavior. Someone had been watching her. Someone had caused her to fear for her safety. Poirot took a deep breath and turned to leave. But before he did, he gave Eleanor one last look. Thank you, mademoiselle, he said, his voice steady. "You have given me much to think about." As he walked away, Poirot's thoughts were already racing. The game had shifted. Someone was behind Clara's disappearance, and Poirot was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. Chapter 7. The first false-led day had turned colder. As Hercule Poirot made his way back to the manor, his mind racing with the new piece of information Eleanor Wren had provided him. Someone had been watching Clara, someone who had caused her fear. It was a small lead, but it was enough to change the direction of the investigation. Whoever this person was, they might hold the key to understanding why Clara had disappeared. But there was no time to dwell on it for too long. Poirot knew the moment he made his way down the hall that the others would be expecting him. As he entered the drawing room, Poirot was met with the expectant gazes of the remaining guests, their faces etched with tension. They had all been gathered at Lady Evelyn's insistence, though no one spoke about the evening's proceedings just yet. The room was thick with the weight of suspicion, each person silently wondering who might be hiding the truth. Poirot's eyes quickly swept across the group, his gaze resting for a moment on each person before settling on Lady Evelyn. She appeared weary, her face pale as though the events of the past day had taken a toll on her. Lady Clarissa, on the other hand, was as composed as ever, sitting straight in her chair with an air of cool detachment. Charles Darnley stood near the window, his expression unreadable, while Eleanor remained quietly seated in the corner. Avoiding eye contact, "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Evelyn said, her voice tinged with a quiet urgency. "What have you learned? Have you discovered anything new?" Poirot took his time to respond, stepping further into the room and positioning himself between the group. "I have learned something, indeed, madam. But as always, we must not rush to conclusions too quickly. There's much more to be uncovered before we can say for certain who is behind Miss Wren's disappearance." There was a collective breath of relief from the guests, but Poirot quickly silenced any potential follow-up questions with a raised hand. "Not yet," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "Before we move forward, I must speak with each of you once again." One at a time, the room fell silent as Lady Evelyn nodded, her face betraying the concern she had yet to voice. Poirot began with Charles Darnley, who had not spoken much since the previous evening. He had been noticeably distant, even aloof, during their brief exchanges, and Poirot could sense a growing sense of unease in the young man. "Ah, Monsieur Darnley," Poirot began, his voice calm. "Let us talk. You were with Miss Wren earlier in the evening, were you not?" She seemed distracted, nervous, perhaps. Charles stiffened at the mention of Clara's name. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, unwilling to meet Poirot's eyes. "Yes," he muttered, "but there's nothing unusual about it. She was always like that. A little on edge, you know." Poirot's gaze never wavered, studying Charles closely. "On edge, you say? And was there a reason for this? Has she said something to you? Or was it simply her usual way of being?" Charles clenched his jaw, visibly uncomfortable. "She didn't say anything to me," he snapped, his voice a bit too sharp. "I don't know why she was on edge, okay? She was just Clara." Poirot's eyes glinted with a knowing look. "I see, and yet you seem to know a great deal about her behavior. You have an interesting way of describing her, Monsieur Darnley. Would you say you were close to Miss Wren? Close enough to understand her moods?" Charles' face reddened slightly, but he turned his back to Poirot, as though trying to compose himself. "I'm not going to answer any more of these questions," he said abruptly. "I don't see how this is relevant." Poirot allowed him to leave without further comment, though his mind had taken note of the young man's defensiveness. The response had been too quick, too sure of itself. It was a reaction that might have been masking something. Next, Poirot turned his attention to Lady Clarissa, who had been watching the exchange between him and Charles with keen interest. She raised an eyebrow as he approached her. "Monsieur Poirot," she said smoothly, Are we to be interrogated one by one like criminals? I should have taught you more subtle methods." Poirot inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her sharp wit. "Madam, I find that a direct approach is often the most revealing. One cannot make assumptions without gathering the necessary details." Lady Clarissa gave a small, dismissive laugh. "And what would those details be, exactly?" Poirot studied her with the same intensity he had given to the others. "Miss Wren had many secrets, madam, but I wonder if you knew more of those secrets than you let on. After all, you were very close to her, weren't you? Her father's death left you with great influence over her affairs." Lady Clarissa's eyes narrowed, her composed forehead slipping ever so slightly. "Clara was my niece, Monsieur Poirot. I cared for her in my own way, but her affairs were her own. I am not the one you should be questioning." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on her, though his voice softened. "Ah, but madam, sometimes those closest to the victim hold the most crucial piece of the puzzle. You must know that by now." Lady Clarissa did not respond immediately, but the shift in her posture told Poirot everything he needed to know. Her calculated calmness had slipped, and in its place there was a flicker of unease. The carefully crafted walls around her secrets were beginning to crack. Before she could offer a retort, Poirot turned his attention to the rest of the group, who had been watching the exchange intently. "Thank you, madam," Poirot said, his voice quiet. "I will speak with you again later." The words hung in the air, and as he turned to the others, Poirot could feel the weight of the case pressing down on him. Something was amiss in this house, and each new piece of the puzzle only made the mystery more complicated. As Poirot continued his questioning, it became clear that each suspect had something to hide. Yet none of them, it seemed, were ready to reveal their truths. The false leads were mounting, and Poirot knew that the real answers lay deeper within the tangled web of relationships at Lakeview Manor. Chapter 8. A second mysterious evening descended upon Lakeview Manor. An unsettling quiet permeated the estate. Hercule Poirot, having spent the day reviewing the gathered information, could feel the tension in the air. Something was amiss, and the mystery surrounding Clara Wren's disappearance deepened with every passing hour. Yet, Poirot knew that no case was solved without methodical work and careful observation. Lady Evelyn had insisted that the group gather once more, and as Poirot entered the drawing-room, he noticed the silent expectancy in the eyes of the guests. The atmosphere was thick, and the walls seemed to echo with unspoken fears. Everyone in the room was on edge, their thoughts scattered and guarded. "Monsieur Poirot." Lady Evelyn greeted him, her voice laced with exhaustion. "What have you discovered? Have you learned anything that can help us?" Poirot studied the gathered group carefully, noting their nervous postures and tense faces. "I have discovered much, madam, but the true answer remains hidden," he replied, his tone measured. "The key to this mystery lies not in what we know, but in what we have yet to understand." Lady Evelyn nodded, her gaze shifting uneasily toward the others. Poirot had already spoken to them all, yet the answers he sought were not forthcoming. The room, once a place of social gathering, now felt like a stage for an unfolding drama, and Poirot was determined to find the truth. "Madam," Poirot continued, turning his attention to her, "you mentioned a new development. What is this, exactly?" Lady Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting toward the other guests, but she finally nodded. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, it's a letter. It was discovered only this evening, another one addressed to Clara. It was hidden in the library, tucked behind a shelf of books." Poirot's interest piqued. "A letter? What does it say?" Lady Evelyn's face darkened, and she took a breath before speaking. "I haven't read it yet. I thought it best to let you see it, as you have the experience." Poirot moved closer as she handed him the letter. He inspected the envelope, noting the absence of a return address or any identifying marks. The seal was intact, but there was something peculiar about it, an unfamiliar symbol embossed into the wax. Without hesitation, Poirot carefully broke the seal and pulled out the letter. He read the words aloud. "Clara, I know you have found it. The truth cannot remain hidden forever. If you wish to uncover what has been hidden, meet me at midnight by the garden gate. Come alone, and come prepared to see what you've always feared." The words were direct, cryptic, and unsettling. Poirot paused for a moment, allowing the weight of the letter to sink in. There was no signature, no clue as to who had written it, but the message was clear. Someone was manipulating Clara, pushing her to meet them in secret. "This is troubling," Poirot murmured, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Whoever wrote this knows Clara was on the verge of discovering something they wanted to keep hidden. Lady Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. But why would she leave us? Why would she go if she was being followed? Poirot's gaze sharpened, his thoughts moving quickly. It's possible that Clara didn't leave of her own accord. She was led. Madam, led by someone who knew her fears and her desires. Whoever wrote this letter might be the key to understanding what truly happened. The silence in the room grew heavy as everyone absorbed Poirot's words. The letter was a significant clue, but it raised more questions than it answered. Who was behind this, and what was Clara truly searching for? Poirot glanced at the group. "Someone among us knows more than they are letting on," he said quietly. "This letter is not just a clue, it's a message, and whoever wrote it is still hiding in the shadows." Lady Clarissa, who had been watching the exchange with an unreadable expression, spoke up. "So you're suggesting one of us is responsible for Clara's disappearance?" Poirot met her gaze, his tone calm but firm. "I suggest nothing, madam, but I do not rule out any possibilities. Whoever wrote this letter is playing a dangerous game, and it is a game that will soon come to an end." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and Poirot could feel the tension rise. He turned back to Lady Evelyn. "This letter may be the first real lead we have. It tells us that Clara was not acting alone, that someone was pushing her toward something. We must find out who and why." Lady Evelyn nodded, though she still appeared shaken by the revelation. "I will help in any way I can, Monsieur Poirot. But we must find Clara. We cannot let this go on any longer." Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the group again, and his mind worked through the possibilities. Whoever had written the letter was close to close. They had manipulated Clara, leading her to this meeting, and now they were watching. Poirot had no intention of letting them slip away unnoticed. "We will find the truth, madam," Poirot said, his voice resolute. "But we must move quickly. The more time we waste, the more dangerous this becomes." As the room fell silent, Poirot's mind raced with the possibilities. There was much to uncover, and each new detail only deepened the mystery. But one thing was clear: Clara's disappearance was no accident, and someone was still orchestrating events from the shadows. Poirot would find them. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The evening was damp and quiet, the rain still tapping lightly against the windows of Lakeview Manor. Hercule Poirot, having spent the majority of the day processing the information gathered, felt the weight of the case settling heavily upon him. The disappearance of Clara Wren was no longer just a mystery of an absent young woman. It was a tangled web of motives, secrets, and connections he had yet to fully uncover. Lady Evelyn Darnley entered the drawing room, her face pale, her posture stiff with unease. She had something on her mind, something she had yet to reveal. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, her voice filled with tension, "there's something I must tell you. Something I should have shared before." Poirot looked up, his attention fully captured. "Madam, please, tell me what it is." Lady Evelyn hesitated for a moment, eyes darting nervously to the others in the room before returning to Poirot. "It concerns Clara's inheritance," she began, her voice dropping as if afraid of being overheard. Clara's father left behind a fortune, but he also left conditions. There were stipulations she had to meet in order to access her inheritance, but I never knew the full details. She kept it to herself. Poirot's interest piqued, and he leaned forward slightly. Conditions? What kind of conditions, madam? Lady Evelyn took a shaky breath. I don't know all the details, but Clara was upset by it, Monsieur Poirot. Her father's will was complex, and I know she was trying to figure it out, but she never shared her findings with anyone. I suspect it might be connected to her disappearance. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the new information. So, Miss Wren was not just searching for answers in her life, but also in her inheritance. This will, was it tied to some kind of condition she needed to fulfill? Lady Evelyn nodded, her hands fidgeting nervously. Yes, she'd mentioned it once, but never in detail. She seemed to think that unlocking her father's secrets would bring clarity, but she never said what those secrets were. Poirot's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. Perhaps Miss Wren was not simply running from a vague fear, madam. She may have been running from the very thing that could have freed her or bound her. I must find out more about her father's will. Before Lady Evelyn could respond, the door to the room creaked open, and Charles Darnley entered. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced with a palpable tension, and his eyes avoided Poirot's. Monsieur Poirot, Charles said, his voice tight. There's something I haven't told you. Something I overheard. I think it's important. Poirot's gaze sharpened as he turned his full attention to Charles. Go on, Monsieur Darnley. What have you overheard? Charles shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his hand across his forehead. It's about my father, Lord Darnley. I overheard some conversations between him and Clara's father before he died. They were business dealings, and not just business, monsieur. There were debts. My father owed Clara's father, and the terms of that debt were strange. Lady Evelyn looked up sharply, her face pale. What kind of debt? Charles lowered his voice. I'm not sure, but I heard my father mention that Clara's father had promised something in return. Something that was connected to Clara. I don't know all the details, but I think she was involved in something far deeper than we imagined. Poirot leaned back in his chair, processing the new revelation. So, the two families were entangled in more than just financial matters. There were promises, obligations that went beyond mere money, and Miss Wren may have been unknowingly caught in the middle of it. Charles nodded, his eyes dark with concern. I don't know what it all means, but I'm certain Clara was caught up in it. She'd mentioned once or twice about wanting to be free from these ties, but I didn't think much of it. Poirot's mind worked quickly. The debts, the promises, the hidden arrangements, these were all pieces of the puzzle. Clara's inheritance was not just a source of wealth, but a key to something far darker. Did Clara ever mention meeting anyone about these matters? Poirot asked. Anyone who might have been involved in her father's arrangements. Charles paused before speaking again, his gaze shifting toward the floor. I think she was supposed to meet someone. I overheard my father mention a meeting, but I didn't know who it was. It was right before she disappeared. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the first true hint of satisfaction. A meeting. This could be the lead we need. Whoever Clara was meeting, whether she knew it or not, holds the key to understanding what happened. Lady Evelyn's face remained etched with worry. So, you think Clara was led somewhere? By someone she trusted? Or was she forced into it? Poirot stood up, pacing slowly round the room. I believe she was being lured. Clara was searching for something her father had hidden. But it is clear now that her search was not without danger. Whoever has been watching her may have known what she was about to uncover. The silence in the room deepened as Poirot's words hung in the air. Each person present was now connected by a shared knowledge. Clara had been part of something much larger than anyone had initially realized. We must find out who Clara was meeting, Poirot concluded. his voice firm. "The truth lies with them." As the group remained in silence, Poirot felt the case shift. The web of secrets surrounding Clara Wren was slowly unspooling, and he was determined to follow it wherever it might lead. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. Night had grown colder. As Hercule Poirot walked through the winding halls of Lakeview Manor, his mind working with a precision only he could master, the mysteries surrounding Clara Wren's disappearance were becoming clearer, but the path to the truth was still shrouded in shadows. As he entered the study, where Lady Evelyn and Charles Darnley had gathered earlier, Poirot's thoughts lingered on the new piece of information, the debts, the promises, and the secrets hidden within Clara's inheritance. Lady Evelyn sat by the fire, her face tired but thoughtful. She looked up as Poirot entered, but there was a quietness in her demeanor, as if she, too, could sense the weight of the mystery they were now entangled in. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice soft, "what will be our next step? Do you have any idea where Clara might be?" Poirot paused for a moment, considering the question. "Madam, I do not yet know where Clara is, but I have something important to share. A clue, perhaps, that could lead us closer to the truth." Lady Evelyn leaned forward, her attention fixed on him. "A clue?" Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing with focus. "Yes, when I reviewed Miss Wren's room earlier, I noticed something peculiar. It was a small detail, almost overlooked, but it is significant." Lady Evelyn raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "What did you find?" Poirot remained silent for a moment, his mind working through the details. There was a small piece of paper, an old receipt, tucked away behind some books on a shelf. It appeared to be from a place in the city, a shop of sorts. "I cannot yet say what it means, but the receipt was dated only a few days before Miss Wren's disappearance. Why would she be holding onto such a thing, if not for something important?" Lady Evelyn's eyes widened. "A receipt, but why would she hide it? And what shop was it from?" Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line as he recalled the details. It was from a shop called La Maison de l'Archive, a small, unassuming establishment known for dealing in rare books and documents. It is not far from the city center, and it specializes in legal papers, contracts, and other forms of documentation. Lady Evelyn's face remained expressionless, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition. "I've heard of it. A very specialized shop." But Clara never mentioned anything about needing legal documents. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet certainty. "Indeed, madam, and that is what troubles me. Clara was clearly involved in something that led her to seek out such a place. The question is, what was she searching for? What document or contract could be so important that she would hide it in such a manner?" Lady Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. "Do you think the shop has something to do with her disappearance?" Poirot nodded slowly. "It is possible. We must investigate further. This receipt, though small, points us towards something more. If Clara was searching for documents related to her father's dealings, this shop may hold the key to understanding what he was involved in. We must go there, madam, and see what we can uncover." At that moment, Charles Darnley entered the study, his face taut with the strain of recent events. He had been following Poirot's investigation from a distance, but something about the conversation had drawn him in. "Monsieur Poirot," Charles began, his voice firm, "what is this shop, and why do you think it's connected to Clara's disappearance?" Poirot turned toward him, his expression steady. "It is a place that deals in documents, monsieur. Legal matters, contracts, papers that are not meant to be seen by the public. If Clara was trying to understand her father's will, it's possible that she sought out this shop for some kind of document that would shed light on her father's dealings." Charles frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "But why go to such lengths? Why seek out a place like that? It's not exactly the kind of thing someone like Clara would do." She was always so careful. Poirot's gaze softened, his tone quiet but resolute. Sometimes, Monsieur Darnley, the things we seek are not easy to find. But Clara was determined to uncover the truth about her father's legacy. And that legacy may have been hidden in plain sight. This shop may have the answers we seek. Charles was silent for a moment, his face reflecting the weight of what Poirot was suggesting. Finally, he spoke, his voice tinged with a sense of urgency. "So what's our next move?" Poirot's eyes locked with his, a silent understanding passing between them. "We go to La Maison de l'Archive. We see what they know. It's the only way we can move forward." Lady Evelyn, though still uneasy, nodded her agreement. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. I'll arrange for us to leave at once. But what if Clara isn't there? What if we find nothing?" Poirot turned to her, his expression calm and composed. "Madam, sometimes we must seek out the smallest details, the smallest clues. They will lead us to the larger truths. And this receipt, though seemingly insignificant, may hold the key with that." Poirot and the Darnleys left the study, their minds heavy with anticipation. The night had become darker, but Poirot could sense they were on the cusp of something important. The mystery was deepening, and the truth was finally beginning to take shape. One small clue at a time. Chapter 11. Tensions riseth heavy rain had not let up as Hercule Poirot, Lady Evelyn, and Charles Darnley made their way toward La Maison de l'Archive. The journey was short, but the uncertainty of what awaited them made every minute feel longer. The streets were slick, reflecting the faint glow of gas lamps that lined the path. Poirot's thoughts swirled with the fragments of information he had collected over the past few days: the debts, the promises, the letter left behind by Clara. Each piece felt like a breadcrumb leading them closer to the heart of the mystery. As they reached the narrow street where the shop was located, Poirot felt a shift in the air. There was a sense of foreboding, as though the answers they were about to uncover would not be without consequences. The shop stood at the end of the street, its weathered sign hanging above the door simple, unadorned and almost deliberately inconspicuous. La Maison de l'Archive was not a place one would casually stumble upon, which only deepened Poirot's suspicions. It had been chosen for a reason, and that reason was likely tied to the secrets Clara had uncovered. "Shall we go inside?" Lady Evelyn's voice broke through Poirot's thoughts. Her eyes were weary, but her determination was clear. The weight of her family's history, the inheritance, and Clara's disappearance hung heavily on her shoulders. Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed, madam, the time has come. We must uncover the truth." Charles Darnley, who had remained silent during the walk, now stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the door. "What do you expect to find in there, Poirot? Do you really think this shop holds the answers we seek?" Poirot turned to face him, his eyes sharp with intent. "I believe we will find something. A document, a letter, perhaps. A clue that will explain why Clara sought out this place and what she uncovered. Sometimes, Monsieur Darnley, the answers lie where we least expect them." With that, Poirot led the way inside, the door creaking slightly as he pushed it open. The inside of La Maison de l'Archive was dimly lit, with shelves upon shelves of old, dust-covered books and papers. The musty smell of aged paper filled the air. A narrow aisle ran between the shelves, leading to a counter at the back where a man sat hunched over, examining a set of documents. He looked up briefly as they entered, his eyes sharp behind a pair of round spectacles. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low but clear, with an almost indifferent tone. He did not seem surprised by their arrival, as though the possibility of strangers walking into his shop was a regular occurrence. Poirot stepped forward, his posture impeccable, his voice steady. "Monsieur, we are looking for information regarding a young woman named Clara Wren. She was here recently, seeking a document. Perhaps you remember her?" The man's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but he quickly masked the reaction. He adjusted his glasses and gave a slight nod. "I do recall her. She was inquiring about a specific contract, but I cannot disclose such matters without proper authorization." Poirot did not falter. "Ah, but monsieur, you must understand. Miss Wren has disappeared, and I suspect the document she was seeking holds the key to understanding why. It is of the utmost importance that we examine it." The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but he did not refuse outright. "I cannot give you the document, but I may be able to direct you to the right place." He leaned forward slightly. "I can tell you that the document Clara was seeking was connected to her father's estate. There was a meeting arranged and agreement to be made." Lady Evelyn's breath caught at his words. "A meeting? With whom?" The man looked over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously toward the back of the shop, as if to make sure no one else was listening. "I'm afraid I cannot say more. You will need to speak with the lawyer who handled the estate. He is the one who has all the details." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "But be careful. The people involved in this matter are not as straightforward as they seem." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and he took a slow step closer to the man. "Where can we find this lawyer?" The man hesitated, glancing toward the door, then back at Poirot. "His office is in the city center. It's called Garnier and Associates. But be warned, he's a cautious man, and he doesn't take kindly to being questioned. If you decide to pursue this, you may find more than you bargained for." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning over the new information. "Thank you, monsieur. We shall seek him out." As they turned to leave, Charles shot a look at Poirot. "What do you think this lawyer knows about Clara's inheritance? Why didn't he mention her father's dealings directly?" Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the door ahead. "Because the truth is not meant to be found easily, monsieur. It is hidden beneath layers of deception, and we must peel them away one by one. The lawyer, like everyone else, is a piece in this puzzle, and he may be the one to reveal the final connection." Once outside, the cool air seemed to snap the tension that had been building inside the shop. The next step was clear. They would have to confront this lawyer, face the consequences of their actions, and uncover what lay hidden within Clara's father's dealings. As they walked toward the city center, Poirot's mind raced. The clues were falling into place, but he knew that the final piece was still out of reach, and in a game of secrets and shadows, it was the smallest detail, one overlooked moment, that could change everything. Chapter 12. The confrontation. City center was a sharp contrast to the quiet, tense atmosphere of Lakeview Manor. The streets were alive with the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestone, and the shops, though modest compared to the grandeur of the estate, hummed with activity. The district where the law firm of Garnier and Associates was located was no different. Its narrow, well-worn streets, lined with small, professional buildings, seemed to echo with the lives of those who had come and gone. Poirot, Lady Evelyn, and Charles Darnley stood at the entrance of the lawyer's office. The door, made of dark oak, had a simple brass plaque that read, "Garnier and Associates, Lawyers of Record." It was unassuming, but Poirot knew that what awaited them inside could alter the course of their investigation. "We are ready," Poirot said quietly, his gaze steady as he looked at Lady Evelyn and Charles. Lady Evelyn nodded, her face pale but determined. She had been silent for most of the journey, her thoughts undoubtedly consumed by the revelations of the past few days. Charles, too, was unusually quiet, his jaw set with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. Poirot stepped forward, his gloved hand grasping the handle of the door. It opened with a soft creak, and the trio entered, the warmth of the interior a sharp contrast to the chill of the evening air. The office was simple but well appointed, with darkwood paneling, heavy curtains, and shelves stacked with legal tomes. A receptionist, a young woman with dark hair and a neutral expression, looked up as they entered. "Good evening. May I help you?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "We are here to speak with Mr. Garnier," Poirot said, his voice measured. "It is a matter of some urgency." The receptionist raised an eyebrow but motioned toward the door behind her. "Mr. Garnier is expecting you. Please follow me." They followed her through a narrow corridor, the silence between them growing heavier with each step. The receptionist knocked on a door and opened it, stepping aside to allow them in. Inside the office was a tall man, his back turned to them as he sorted through a stack of papers. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his gray hair neatly combed, and his features were stern yet composed. He turned as they entered, his gaze flickering over each of them before settling on Poirot. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice smooth, though there was a hint of wariness. "I've been expecting you. Please come in." Poirot inclined his head, stepping into the room. Lady Evelyn and Charles followed, taking seats in front of the desk. "You must forgive me for not offering you my hand," Garnier continued, "but I assume you're here with a matter of utmost importance." "Indeed, Monsieur Garnier," Poirot replied, his eyes sharp. "We have come to speak with you about the late Mr. Wren's will. It concerns his daughter, Clara Wren." Garnier's expression shifted subtly, his gaze flicking to Lady Evelyn before returning to Poirot. "I see. And what precisely do you wish to know?" Poirot wasted no time. "We have reason to believe that Clara's disappearance is connected to certain arrangements made by her father. We are aware that her inheritance was tied to conditions that Miss Wren had been trying to understand before she disappeared." Garnier's expression hardened slightly, his fingers tapping the edge of his desk. "I cannot disclose details about my client's affairs, Monsieur Poirot. That is privileged information. But I will say that Clara Wren's inheritance was a matter of some complexity." Lady Evelyn leaned forward, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "Monsieur Garnier, you must understand. Clara has gone missing, and we are doing everything we can to find her. If there is any information you can provide about her inheritance, about the conditions tied to it, it may be the key to understanding what happened to her." Garnier looked at her for a moment, his eyes flickering with something that resembled indecision. After a brief silence, he spoke again. "I will say this much," he began slowly, his voice measured. "Clara's inheritance was not straightforward. There were stipulations regarding the family estate, as well as a personal arrangement between her father and another party. Clara was aware of it, though she never fully understood the scope of it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Another party? Who exactly?" Garnier paused, his fingers brushing over a piece of paper on his desk. "I cannot divulge names, Monsieur Poirot, but I will tell you that Clara's father was involved in a series of confidential agreements. These agreements were tied to Clara's inheritance, and they were to be honored upon her reaching a certain age. I believe Clara was attempting to locate one of these documents before her disappearance." Charles leaned forward, his voice tinged with frustration. "What kind of arrangements were these? Why was Clara searching for these documents?" Garnier's gaze flicked to Charles, then to Lady Evelyn. "I cannot go into further detail," he said, his voice firm. "All I can tell you is that Clara's search was not without consequence. Whoever she was meeting, whoever she was trying to reach, may have been connected to these arrangements." Poirot's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Clara had been looking for something specific, something connected to her father's dealings. But what and who had been following her? "I understand," Poirot said, his voice steady, "but you will admit, Monsieur Garnier, that these details are essential to our investigation. Clara's disappearance is no simple matter, and I believe these documents are critical to uncovering the truth." Garnier's expression remained unreadable. "I suggest you continue your search elsewhere, Monsieur Poirot. I have provided all the information I can." Poirot studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well, Monsieur Garnier. We will find the answers we seek." As Poirot and the others left the office, the weight of the lawyer's words lingered. Clara's inheritance, her father's secrets, and the mysterious third party. There were more layers to this case than he had initially anticipated. But Poirot was not deterred. The answers were out there, and he would uncover them, no matter the cost. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. As they left the law office of Garnier and Associates, Poirot's mind whirred with the new revelations. The mysterious agreements tied to Clara's inheritance were still a puzzle, and Garnier's reluctance to disclose further details only deepened the mystery. But Poirot knew one thing for certain: Clara had been searching for something that was hidden, something that would reveal the truth about her father's dealings, and someone had been watching her, possibly controlling the outcome of the search. The streets of the city were quieter now, the sounds of the bustling marketplace giving way to the more hushed evening air. The rain had subsided, leaving the city drenched in a cold, foggy stillness. Poirot, Lady Evelyn, and Charles Darnley walked in silence, each consumed by their thoughts, until Poirot finally spoke, breaking the quiet tension. "We are closer now." "Madam, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice calm but tinged with resolve. "There is much we still do not know, but the pieces are falling into place." Lady Evelyn glanced at him, her eyes tired but filled with a hint of hope. "You believe we are on the right track?" Poirot nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I do, madam, but I fear we have only begun to scratch the surface. The more we learn, the more questions arise. Whoever is behind this, whoever is manipulating Clara's fate, will not let us find the truth easily." As they continued walking, Charles spoke up, his voice laced with frustration. "But what are we missing, Poirot? What don't we know yet? Clara was so careful. Why leave behind the letter, the clues? Why was she so determined to uncover her father's secrets?" Poirot paused, turning to face Charles. His eyes, sharp and calculating, studied the young man for a moment before he answered. "Mademoiselle Wren was not simply running from fear, Monsieur Darnley. She was searching for something, a truth she could not ignore. But fear had a role in it too. Clara was afraid, and yet she continued, perhaps hoping that by understanding her father's legacy, she would free herself from it." Charles's expression softened slightly. "And now we're tangled in it too," he muttered. Poirot did not reply immediately, instead allowing the weight of Charles's words to sink in. They were all caught in the web of Clara's search, but they had no choice but to follow it to its end. The group continued down the street, the fog thickening as they neared Lakeview Manor. Poirot's thoughts, however, were interrupted by a sudden noise, a muffled thud followed by hurried footsteps. Poirot instinctively turned, his eyes narrowing as he searched the shadowed street ahead. There, in the distance, a figure emerged, running quickly away from the direction of the manor. Poirot's sharp gaze caught the movement immediately. The figure was cloaked, their features hidden by the darkness. But the way they moved, quick, almost panic, told Poirot everything he needed to know. "Stay here," Poirot instructed, his voice low but urgent. Without waiting for a response, he broke into a swift jog, pursuing the figure through the mist. Lady Evelyn and Charles hesitated for only a moment before following, though they kept a safe distance. Poirot was already gaining on the figure, his steps sure and fast despite the slippery streets. The figure glanced over their shoulder once, then quickened their pace, disappearing down a narrow alleyway. Poirot did not lose ground, the alleyway growing tighter as they approached the end. As he reached the alley's dead end, Poirot's eyes flicked around quickly, his sharp mind working at full speed. The figure had nowhere to go. He turned the corner just in time to see the cloaked figure make a desperate move, reaching for a door to the left, yanking it open. But before the figure could slip inside, Poirot was there. With one swift movement, he caught the door before it slammed shut. Pushing it open with an authoritative force, the figure froze, momentarily caught by surprise. Poirot stepped inside, his eyes quickly adjusting to the dim light. The figure, realizing there was no escape, slowly removed their hood, revealing a familiar face, one that took Poirot only a moment to recognize. Lady Clarissa, Poirot said, his voice steady, but carrying an unmistakable weight of disbelief. Lady Clarissa stood before him, her hands raised slightly as if in surrender, but her eyes were filled with defiance. Monsieur Poirot, she said coolly, her voice controlled despite the obvious tension. I must say, you are more resourceful than I anticipated. Poirot took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. Why are you running, madam? You have been watching, haven't you? You've been involved in Clara's disappearance from the very beginning. Lady Clarissa did not flinch, though there was a subtle tightness in her jaw. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Poirot. This is far more complicated than you think. Clara was never meant to uncover the truth, and now you, too, are becoming a part of it. Poirot's expression remained unfazed, though the pieces were starting to fall into place. It is clear, madam, that you have been hiding something that Clara uncovered. Tell me, what was she truly searching for? And why are you so intent on keeping it from us? Lady Clarissa's eyes flashed with something between fear and anger, but her resolve held firm. I will not answer that, Poirot. Not now. Not ever. Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. You have no choice. We will find the truth, madam, whether you cooperate or not. The tension in the air was thick, the confrontation at its peak, and though Lady Clarissa had managed to evade the truth for so long, Poirot was closing in on the final revelation. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. Lady Clarissa's defiant gaze met Poirot's. As the silence stretched between them, thick with tension, the truth that had eluded him for so long now felt within reach. But the puzzle still wasn't complete. The cloak of secrecy that had shrouded Clara Wren's disappearance was slowly unraveling. But Lady Clarissa's refusal to speak left the detective with more questions than answers. Poirot took a step closer, his voice calm but unyielding. Madam, I know you are hiding something. You know what Clara was searching for. You know what has happened to her. You cannot avoid the truth any longer. Lady Clarissa's expression remained cold, but her fingers tightened around the folds of her coat. You are mistaken, Poirot. I am not hiding anything. Clara was always a disappointment, a foolish girl who thought she could uncover things she was never meant to know. She couldn't let go of her father's legacy, and that led her to her fate. Poirot's sharp eyes studied her every movement, every subtle shift in her posture. And yet, madam, your actions suggest otherwise. You've been keeping track of her, haven't you? You've been hiding the truth, manipulating the events leading up to her disappearance. Why? Lady Clarissa's eyes flickered briefly, a crack in her composed exterior. You cannot possibly understand what Clara was involved in. It was far beyond her comprehension. And now you, too, have become part of it. I never intended for this to go so far. Poirot stood still, his mind working through her words like a maze. Lady Clarissa's sudden shift in tone was telling. She was no longer entirely confident, and the flicker of guilt was undeniable. The stakes were higher than Clara's inheritance. They were tied to something more dangerous, something that even Lady Clarissa feared. You are trying to protect something, madam, Poirot said quietly, but you do not need to protect it any longer. It's time to tell the truth. What is it that Clara found? What is it that you are afraid of? Lady Clarissa looked away, her lips pressed tightly together, and for a moment, Poirot thought she might remain silent. But then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice low and resigned. Clara found her father's secret account, she whispered, her eyes avoiding Poirot's gaze. An account that no one was ever meant to see. It wasn't just a matter of inheritance. There were transactions, deals that her father had made with people who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. She was getting too close. That's why she had to disappear. Poirot's heart quickened, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place at last. Who were these people? Who would go to such lengths to hide the truth? Lady Clarissa shook her head slowly, her expression tormented. I cannot tell you. I don't know who they are, but I know they will never let anyone uncover their secrets, and they've been watching us all along. Poirot's mind raced with the implications of her words. You mean to say that Clara's disappearance was not an accident? Someone made sure she couldn't reveal what she found? Lady Clarissa's face twisted with fear. Yes, they threatened her. They threatened all of us. And when she started asking questions, when she found that account, she became a liability. I tried to warn her. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. She was determined to uncover everything. Poirot took a slow, deliberate step forward, his voice softening. And you, madam, were you involved in this? Did you know about these transactions? Lady Clarissa's expression hardened once again. I knew enough to understand the danger, but I wasn't part of it, Poirot. I'm not a criminal. I only wanted to protect Clara from what she didn't understand, what she was too naive to see. Poirot studied her, his gaze piercing. You still haven't answered my question, madam. Who are these people? Lady Clarissa's face turned pale, and she stepped back, as though recoiling from the very thought. I don't know their names. I only know that they will do whatever it takes to keep their secrets safe. They're not ordinary people. They're powerful, dangerous, and they have connections everywhere. If Clara had continued down this path, she would have been exposed to them, and that's why she had to disappear. Poirot stood motionless, processing the information. The final pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was still incomplete. Lady Clarissa's fear was real, and the truth she had just revealed pointed to something much darker than Clara's inheritance. I understand now, Poirot said slowly, his mind already working through the next steps. But there is more to this, madam. Clara's disappearance was not just the result of a hidden account. There's someone else involved, someone who has been orchestrating this entire situation. From the shadows, Lady Clarissa's eyes widened with alarm, and she took a step back. What are you saying, Poirot? Who could be behind this? Poirot's gaze sharpened, his voice quiet but firm. I believe someone close to Clara, someone who knew exactly what she was searching for, has been manipulating the events all along. They knew she was close to uncovering the truth, and they made sure she wouldn't get the chance. Lady Clarissa seemed to recoil at the suggestion. You think it was someone within the family? Someone here? Poirot's eyes met hers, his expression unwavering. I do. The answer is closer than you think, madam. We must look within the walls of this very manor. For the person who has been hiding the truth all along is someone who stands right before us. Lady Clarissa stood frozen, the weight of Poirot's words settling on her. The mystery was far from over, but the final piece of the puzzle was within reach. The truth was almost in their grasp, but who would it implicate, and at what cost? Chapter 15. The final gathering hours that followed Poirot's confrontation with Lady Clarissa were fraught with uncertainty. The night deepened. As he continued to reflect on the new information, Clara's search for her father's secret account, the dangerous people connected to it, and the shadowy figure pulling the strings behind her disappearance. Yet, Poirot knew he had only one avenue left to uncover the truth. The pieces were all there, but he had to put them together carefully. The suspects in this case had all hidden something, and now it was time to bring everything into the open. The decision was made. Poirot would gather all the suspects and reveal what he had discovered. The time for subtlety was over. It was time for the truth to be laid bare. Lady Evelyn, Charles Darnley, and Lady Clarissa were all to be present, but Poirot knew the room would be thick with tension. Each of them had something to hide, and it would take Poirot's keen mind to expose the deception. As the group assembled in the drawing room, the air was thick with anticipation. Lady Evelyn sat by the window, her face drawn with worry. Charles Darnley stood near the fireplace, his jaw tight, his gaze distant. Lady Clarissa, though still composed, had an edge to her demeanor, as if she, too, knew the gravity of the situation. Poirot stepped into the room, his presence commanding, yet calm. He studied each person carefully, taking note of their subtle body language, Lady Evelyn's clenched hands, Charles's unease, Lady Clarissa's defensive posture. They were all waiting, but for what? He stood before them, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room, and for a moment, there was complete silence. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. "I have gathered you here today," Poirot began, his voice steady but firm, "because the truth cannot remain hidden any longer. I have spent days examining the evidence, speaking with you all, and yet the answers remained elusive until now." Lady Evelyn's gaze locked with Poirot's, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "You found something, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, madam. I have found the final piece of the puzzle. But in order for us to move forward, I must first lay bare what I have uncovered." He turned his gaze to Charles Darnley, who shifted uneasily. "Monsieur Darnley, you were the first to suggest that Clara's search had something to do with her inheritance, and you were right. But there is more to this than just money. Clara's father left her a legacy. Yes, but it was tied to something much darker than just wealth." Charles frowned, his face tightening. "What are you suggesting, Poirot? That my father was involved in something illegal?" Poirot's gaze remained unwavering. "Not just your father, monsieur. Both your families were involved in a web of deceit, secrecy, and danger. And Clara, with her relentless pursuit of the truth, was caught in the middle of it." Lady Clarissa, unable to remain silent any longer, spoke up sharply. "What are you accusing us of, Poirot? We have nothing to hide." Poirot turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Madam, I am not accusing you of anything, yet. But you, like the others, have hidden something. And the time for hiding is over." Lady Evelyn rose from her seat, her voice trembling slightly. "Poirot, please, if you know something, tell us. We deserve to know what happened to Clara." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Indeed, madam. And I will tell you. The truth is this. Clara's disappearance was no accident. She was targeted by someone who knew about the secret dealings between your families. Someone who knew she was close to uncovering the truth." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. "The person who did this, the person who orchestrated Clara's disappearance, is someone who is still here, among us." A gasp went up from the group. Lady Evelyn looked at her son, then at Lady Clarissa, her face filled with disbelief. "You can't mean that, Poirot. Someone here?" Poirot raised a hand to silence the rising murmur. "Yes, madam. Someone here has been hiding the truth, manipulating events to prevent Clara from revealing the full extent of what she discovered. And I now know who it is." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Poirot turned to face each person in turn, his eyes narrowing as he spoke. "Lady Clarissa," he began, his voice steady, "you knew about the secret account Clara's father had kept hidden. You were the one who helped him conceal it. You were the one who convinced Clara to stop searching. But when she continued, when she grew too close to the truth, you knew you had to stop her. And so, you took matters into your own hands." Lady Clarissa's face drained of color, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. Poirot's gaze shifted to Charles Darnley. "And you, Monsieur Darnley, you knew more than you let on. You were involved in your father's dealings with Clara's father, and you were aware of the lengths your family would go to in order to keep their secrets. You weren't innocent in this." Charles swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Lady Clarissa and Poirot. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough to understand that Clara was in danger." Poirot's eyes softened for a moment. "Indeed, monsieur, you were torn, caught between your family's secrets and the woman you claimed to care about. But in the end, you did nothing to stop what happened." Lady Evelyn, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke, her voice shaking. "So what does this mean for Clara? What happened to her?" Poirot turned to her, his expression solemn. "What happened to Clara was tragic, madam, but it was not her fault. She was searching for the truth, and she paid the price for it. The person behind all of this will be held accountable." The room remained silent, each person processing the enormity of what had been revealed. The truth had finally come to light, but it had come at a steep price. Poirot's gaze lingered on each person, and he spoke once more, his voice firm. "Justice will be served, madam. But first, we must ensure that Clara's legacy is protected, and that those responsible for her fate are held accountable." Chapter 16. The revealed tension in the drawing room was palpable. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Hercule Poirot, each of them waiting for the final revelation. The weight of his words hung in the air, and the silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Lady Clarissa, Charles Darnley, and Lady Evelyn had all been implicated in some way. But it wasn't enough to just know their roles. What mattered now was the full truth, the one they had been avoiding. The one Poirot had carefully pieced together. Poirot remained standing before them, his posture impeccable, though his eyes were filled with quiet resolve. "The time has come," he said, his voice steady. "You all know what has been revealed, but there is one final truth that must be told. The person who orchestrated Clara Wren's disappearance is closer than you think. And that person, I believe, is one of you." Lady Clarissa's face drained of color as the room collectively held its breath. You're accusing me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and indignation. "You think I did this to Clara?" Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. "No, madam, but you played a part, just as the others did. You were afraid of what Clara might uncover, so you did what you thought was necessary to protect your family and its secrets. But now the truth has come to light." Charles Darnley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "But Poirot," he interjected, "you must understand. We didn't know what Clara was truly involved in. We thought she was simply obsessed with the inheritance. We didn't know the danger she was in." Poirot's eyes locked with Charles's, his expression unwavering. "Perhaps you didn't, Monsieur Darnley, but the fact remains that each of you allowed Clara to walk down a path she could not return from. The secrets were kept, the truth buried, and now we are left with the consequences." Lady Evelyn looked between her son and Lady Clarissa, her face filled with disbelief. "What are you suggesting, Poirot? That we had some part in this?" Poirot turned to her, his voice calm but heavy with the gravity of the situation. "You all had a part, madam, whether by omission, by fear, or by manipulation. Clara was desperate to find the truth about her father's will, about the legacy he left behind. But she was not prepared for the consequences of what she uncovered. Whoever wrote that letter, whoever led her into this dangerous game, knew exactly what they were doing." Lady Clarissa's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and guilt. "This is madness," she said sharply. "You think I've been hiding the truth all along? I tried to protect Clara from herself, from the dangers of digging too deep into the family's past." Poirot shook his head. "Madam, you were not protecting her. You were protecting yourself. You knew that Clara's discovery would unravel everything, your family's wealth, your secrets. But someone else knew it too, someone who had been watching her every move." For a moment, there was silence as everyone absorbed Poirot's words. The realization of what had truly transpired was settling in. The room seemed smaller now, as though the walls were closing in on them. Poirot continued, his voice steady. "There is one final piece of this puzzle, a piece I've been waiting to uncover. Clara didn't just stumble upon her father's secret account. She was being guided, led down a dangerous path. She was not alone in her search, and the person who knew exactly how to manipulate her, how to keep her on track, is the person who ultimately sealed her fate At this, Lady Clarissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. "This is preposterous. I had nothing to do with Clara's disappearance. Nothing." Her voice cracked with desperation. Poirot's eyes were unwavering. "Madam, I believe the person behind Clara's disappearance is you." A stunned silence followed. Lady Clarissa's face was a mixture of shock and disbelief, but Poirot saw through the facade. She was no longer able to keep up the act, no longer able to hide the guilt in her eyes. "Me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would I want to harm my niece? I only wanted to keep her safe." She was reckless, always chasing after things she didn't understand. Poirot took a step closer, his voice calm yet filled with certainty. "Because, madam, you were the one who held the most to lose. You knew what Clara had discovered, and you knew that if she continued, it would all unravel. The documents, the debts, the promises her father had made, they would have been exposed. And you would have lost everything." Lady Clarissa's lips trembled, and for the first time, Poirot saw the cracks in her composure. "I did what I had to do," she whispered, almost to herself. "I did it to protect us all." Poirot shook his head. "No, madam, you did it to protect yourself. You allowed Clara to be driven by fear, to dig into the past without knowing the danger that came with it. And when she got too close to the truth, you acted." Lady Clarissa's shoulders sagged, her face falling into her hands. The guilt was undeniable now, written plainly across her features. The game was up. Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn and Charles, both of whom were silent, their faces pale as they absorbed the truth. "You, too, Monsieur Darnley, were complicit in this. You knew the family's history, and you allowed it to happen. You could have stopped it." Charles, his face twisted with guilt, looked at his mother and then at Poirot. "I didn't know," he muttered, his voice hollow. "I never knew the extent of it, but I should have." Poirot gave him a long, assessing look before turning back to Lady Clarissa. "The truth is, madam, you have played your part in a much larger game, and now you must face the consequences of your actions." The room fell silent, the weight of the truth settling on them all. Poirot had exposed the darkness hiding beneath the surface of Clara's disappearance, and with it, the secrets of the Darnley and Wren families. Chapter 17, Outcome. And Justice's silence in the drawing room lingered, thick and suffocating, as the weight of Poirot's words hung heavily in the air. Lady Clarissa, her face pale and her shoulders slumped, could no longer mask the truth. Her efforts to conceal the dark secrets of the past, the manipulations and the lies, had finally been uncovered. But now, as the truth unfolded, the question remained: what would happen next? The consequences of her actions, of the actions of all those involved, were about to take shape. Poirot, though his expression remained composed, felt the gravity of the moment. He had revealed the truth, but revealing the truth was never enough. Justice had to be served, and it would be up to him to ensure that it was. Lady Clarissa sat down, her hands shaking as she clasped them in her lap. Her eyes, once filled with defiance, now showed the unmistakable signs of regret. Charles Darnley, standing by the fireplace, looked between Poirot and his mother, guilt flooding his expression. He had been complicit, too, in letting the secret stay hidden for so long. He had known enough to stop it, but had done nothing. Lady Evelyn, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke, her voice fragile yet firm. "What happens now, Poirot? What should we do?" Poirot turned his gaze toward her, his eyes softening ever so slightly. "Madam, the truth has been exposed, but the consequences are not for me to decide alone. What happens now is in the hands of the authorities. What I can do is ensure that Clara's fate does not go unpunished." Lady Clarissa raised her head slightly, her voice trembling. "You'll go to the authorities, won't you? You'll tell them what I've done?" Poirot gave a slight nod, though his eyes remained steady. "Yes, madam, I will tell them what I know. But understand this: what you did What your family did has consequences. You may not have intended for Clara to disappear, but your actions led to it, and that cannot go unpunished." Lady Clarissa's face crumpled, and she turned away, tears welling in her eyes. Her pride, once so strong, had been shattered. The carefully constructed world she had worked so hard to maintain now lay in ruins, and there was nothing left but the cold reality of her guilt. Charles Darnley, who had been standing in the corner, finally spoke, his voice filled with regret. "I should have stopped it. I should have known. I never thought it would go this far." Poirot turned to him, his gaze hard but not unkind. "Monsieur Darnley, you were part of it, just as much as your mother. You did not act, and that is a fault you must reckon with. But you, too, must face the consequences of your actions." Charles swallowed hard, his eyes lowering. "I know, and I will. But what happens to my mother now?" Poirot's voice softened slightly as he answered, "That is not for me to decide, monsieur. But I can tell you this, the truth has a way of finding those who try to hide it, and the truth will not be ignored. Justice will be done." A long silence followed Poirot's words. It seemed as though the weight of the past few days had finally begun to settle on everyone in the room. Lady Clarissa, though still in shock, had begun to regain some semblance of control. Charles, too, seemed to accept the gravity of the situation. Lady Evelyn, who had been watching the exchange in silence, spoke again. "So what of Clara? What do we do now?" Poirot looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Clara's fate is still uncertain. She may be lost to us, but the truth is now in the open. Her disappearance was not an accident. It was orchestrated by those who were desperate to hide the truth. But the truth, as we know, always comes to light." Lady Evelyn's shoulders slumped with a sigh. "I never imagined it would come to this. That my family, that my own sister's daughter, would be dragged into such a web of lies." Poirot gave a soft, understanding nod. "It is always easier to hide the truth than to confront it, madam. But in the end, truth has its own way of coming to the surface." There was a long pause as the weight of the events settled over them all. Lady Clarissa sat with her head bowed, tears silently streaking down her face. Charles Darnley stood stiffly, his expression unreadable. Lady Evelyn, though still shaken, appeared to gather herself, her gaze fixed on Poirot. "And you, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Evelyn said, her voice quieter now. "What will you do now that the truth has been revealed?" Poirot's gaze softened. "I will leave this place soon. My work here is done, but the aftermath of what has transpired will carry on. Clara's fate, the repercussions for your family, these are things that cannot be erased. But at least now, madam, you will know the truth. That is the first step toward healing." As Poirot spoke, the weight of his words seemed to settle over the room. They all sat in silence, each person processing the revelations in their own way. The truth had come, but with it, the burden of what had been done and what remained to be faced. And though Clara Wren was still missing, the final piece of the puzzle had been revealed. The shadowy forces that had orchestrated her disappearance, the web of secrets that had ensnared the Darnley and Wren families, were no longer hidden. The consequences would follow, and justice, however it may unfold, would be served. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The evening had drawn to a close, the last of the rain now subsiding as the night stretched on. The tension in Lakeview Manor had not quite dissipated, but it had shifted, settling into an eerie calm. The air, thick with the weight of the revelations, was quieter now, no longer filled with the frantic whispers of deception, but with the cold quiet of truth. Poirot stood by the window, looking out at the darkened landscape, his sharp gaze searching the distant trees and the quiet waters of the lake. His mind, ever calculating, was still working through the case, though he had reached its conclusion. He knew that the ripples of the past few days would echo far longer. Behind him, Lady Evelyn, Charles, and Lady Clarissa sat in silence. Their faces were drawn, their expressions haunted by the weight of what had transpired. The once grandiose manor, with its opulent furnishings and luxurious halls, now felt like a cage of secrets too heavy to bear. The family was fractured, broken by the truth that had come to light, and there was no simple repair for the damage done. Poirot turned, his movements deliberate and steady as he addressed them one final time. "Madam, monsieur, you now know what I know. The truth has been unveiled, and though it brings no comfort, it is the first step toward understanding, toward accountability. But there is one last thing I must say." Lady Evelyn, who had been silent for most of the evening, now looked at him with weary eyes. "What is it, Monsieur Poirot? What else is there?" Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. "There is always more to the story, madam, even in the midst of revelations, even when everything seems exposed. There is still the question of what happens next. What will you do with what you now know?" Lady Clarissa, her face pale and her features tight with restraint, spoke first. "What do you mean by that, Poirot? Are you suggesting that we are responsible for this?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Not responsible, madam, but your choices, your silence, your reluctance to confront the truth. These things have consequences. What Clara's father left behind, and what you all chose to hide, has taken its toll. The consequences are not just for Clara, but for you as well." Charles Darnley shifted in his seat, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "So what now? What happens to us? What happened to my mother?" Poirot gave him a long look, his voice even but carrying a weight of finality. "Now, Monsieur Darnley, now it is time to face what has been done. The truth cannot be erased, and neither can the damage caused. But you all must make a choice now. You must choose to move forward, or you will remain bound to the past." Lady Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she held herself together. "I never thought it would come to this. My family, our name destroyed by secrets we couldn't bear to face." Poirot stepped closer to her, his gaze gentle but piercing. "Madam, it is not the truth that destroys. It is the fear of it, the refusal to confront what lies hidden, that causes the greatest harm. You can begin again. The past cannot be changed, but it need not define you." He turned to face Lady Clarissa, who was seated in stiff silence, her eyes averted. "And you, madam, must now decide what role you will play in the aftermath. You were not a bystander in this, though you tried to convince yourself that you were. But the truth is now yours to accept, and with that acceptance comes the opportunity for redemption." The room was silent as Poirot's words settled into the minds of those present. The manor, now a tomb of memories, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next step to unfold. Poirot's gaze lingered on the family, but his thoughts were already moving ahead, toward the next chapter. He had solved the case, exposed the truth, but it was clear that the real work both for the Darnley family and for Clara Wren's legacy was just beginning. Turning away from the group, Poirot walked toward the door. "I will leave you now, madam, monsieur. You must now decide what you will do with the truth, with the consequences of your actions. You will choose your own path." As Poirot stepped into the hallway, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. The family was still seated, caught in the weight of their choices, but he knew that they would have to face the future alone now. He had done what he could. Poirot left Lakeview Manor, his mind clear but heavy with the understanding that no case, no matter how much it was solved, was ever truly finished. The ripples of truth would continue to spread, reaching farther than anyone could imagine. But Poirot was at peace, knowing that the truth had finally been brought to light, and that, after all, was the only thing that mattered.